May I change it a little bit? It's strange to, it's just like this. Everybody there. Okay, so good morning, and let me start by really thanking you for inviting me and offer me the opportunity to formulate some thoughts on the relation between school and belonging. And as you can see here, at the background, there is a little book which I wrote together, and this notion together will come up many times, I think, which I wrote together with my colleague and friend Maarten Simons, which is a defense of the school, and which you can also freely download from the internet. So that will offer a little bit the background of what I'm going to say. I have also to say that I was really impressed by the presentation yesterday evening of the way in which teacher education is organized here, and also this tradition of free school and of the Volkshogescholen. And the way in which pedagogy seems to be at the basis, or the kind of pedagogy that seems at the basis of this teacher education, I really hope I can say something that can add a little upon that, because there is also an issue that I'm not very aware of what is really happening here in Denmark and in your schools, so I'm not sure if I will be able to do so, but let's try. I have also to say that although I will address, of course, the issues that were announced in the abstract of my presentation, I will not follow the exact order of the abstract, since in order to indicate how today we are confronted with a deschooling and how this affects the issue of belonging, and I think I will be able to come back to the tattoo and the performance, I will have to first indicate how I understand school, and I have immediately to clarify that I want to investigate the relation between school and belonging from an educational point of view. Sorry, I'm looking for the PowerPoint thing. So because I must say I'm not so very well at this, and to do that and then read together, so it's difficult exercise for me, so I apologize for that. So this means, so I start from an educational point of view. So what this means is that I will not ask how school could promote the power of belonging, which would require that I would first have to explore and articulate what belonging is and what it can achieve. I think such an endeavor is, of course, legitimate and valuable, but it implies, in fact, that the school is itself approached in an instrumental or functional way. So as John Dewey, and that's the quote from Dewey, states, school then first appears as an attempt to shape the dispositions and beliefs of their members. Even when the process of education do not aim at the unchanged perpetuation of existing institutions, it is assumed that there must be a mental picture of some desired end, personal and social, which is to be attained, and that this conception of a fixed, determined end ought to control educative processes. Reformers share this conviction with conservatives. The disciples of Lenin and Mussolini, and we are in the beginning of the 20th century, compete with the captains of capitalist society in endeavoring to bring about a formation of dispositions and ideas which will conduce to a preconceived goal. An experimental social method would probably manifest itself, first of all, in surrender of this notion. So that is not what I'm going to do, and I think that's not an educational approach. Such an instrumental view, I think you could call it also external, and it is in fact very common. So sociological, psychological, philosophical, ethical, political approaches to school all start from something which is at first articulated independently of school education, and then asking how school can be instrumental or detrimental for performing functions, for example, the function of socialization, of qualification, of selection, or for enhancing processes. For example, the psychological perspective implies that there are processes of cognitive, emotional, moral, neural development which can be defined and described independent from school, and that hence then school can facilitate or hinder these processes. It can be also about, the school can also be instrumentalized for realizing ideals that can be conservative or progressive ideas, for example, of the educated person. So I don't want to question these approaches. I think they are very valuable, they have their own value. But I want to make, so to say, the reverse move. I will try to adopt what I call an internal or educational perspective and try to articulate what school is as a pedagogic form. So not as an institution. Institution is for me already a taming of the pedagogic form. So I will talk about it as a pedagogic form, and I will also, of course, try to say what I mean by that. So school as a pedagogic form, what it does, how it operates, if school, so if it is the pedagogic form. And from there I will elaborate a scholastic understanding of belonging. And I will indeed argue that as a pedagogic form, school is in itself a particular practice and technology of belonging, but that today we are confronted with learning environments that in fact are including many operations of deschooling, hence affecting belonging. And so I will conclude that in order to foster belonging, we need maybe to bring back more school into, so reschool our educational institutions, which are on the way to be deschooled. Let me start by a short description. And I think I will have to look also for my slides because, yeah, that's the one. So, just a short description, or a story if you want. She had seen those animals often. She knew some of them by name. The cat and the dog, of course, they run around at home. She knows birds too. She could distinguish a sparrow from a tit and a blackbird from a crow. And of course, all the farm animals. But she never gave it a second thought. That's just how it was common sense. Until that moment. A lesson with nothing but prints. No movies, but beautiful prints that turned the classroom into a zoo, except without the cages and the bars. And the voice of the teacher who commanded our attention because she let the prince speak. Birds got a beak and the beak a shape, and the shape spoke about the food, the bug eaters, the seed eaters, the fish eaters. She was drawn into the animal kingdom. It all became real. What once seemed obvious became strange and alluring. The birds began to speak again, and she could suddenly speak about them in a new way. That some birds migrate and others stay put, that kiwi is a bird, a flightless bird from New Zealand, that birds can go extinct. She was introduced to the dodo, and this in a classroom with the door closed, sitting at her desk. A world she did not know, a world she had never paid much attention to, a world that appeared as if from nothing, conjured by magical prints and an enchanting voice. She did not know what surprised her most, this new world that had been revealed to her, or the growing interest that she discovered in herself. It didn't matter. Walking home that day, something had changed. See, she had changed. So that's the story, and I'm in a certain sense going to comment on this story. So I said I want to approach the school as a pedagogic form, so not as an institutional form, which also means that school can exist outside the institution. As a pedagogic form, it can be outside institutions. What is it? I conceive it as a particular, artificially, that means technologically, composed gathering. So it is a coming together. The notion together comes from gathering, together, to bring together, an arrangement of people, time, space, and matter that constitutes a milieu, which is a very nice French word, which means milieu, it's a lieu, it's a place, but it's also a middle. It's not an environment that is around us, but it's a middle where we are. So it's a milieu where people, young people, are brought in each other's company, because the school is an issue of being in company, and in company of something of the world in a particular way. So that world opens up, and that one starts to belong to world, and so not at first to a community or an identity. It enables a particular kind or form of learning and experience that departs from, as I will try to articulate a little bit, that departs from freedom, equality, and the absence of a pre-given natural or social destiny. School, in this sense, I think just as democracy was an invention to deal with social issues, with the issues of living together in a very particular way, so school is an invention to deal with the new generation in a very particular way. It is an invention through which the older generation deals in a particular way with the new generation, one which is different from socialization and initiation. It's different, it is education. Yes, and I want to point your attention to the origin of the notion education, which can be double. So you can relate it to educare, which has to do with feeding up. Yes, but you can also, and I like that one very much, relate it to the educere, which means to lead out, not to lead in, not to introduce, but to educe, to get you out. Yes? So school is not socialization, or the kind of learning that is typical for school is not socialization or initiation. Of course, there will be some socialization and initiation all the time, but there is something else. And as such, it has indeed nothing to do with the kind of natural or informal learning that is often implicitly or explicitly cherished by those who oppose scholastic forms of learning. Scholastic forms of learning, I repeat, are artificial, not natural. Yes. And I want to defend that it is artificial and not natural. So, school as pedagogic form is a gathering that you could formulate as a gathering that makes a kind of time happening. The school makes a gathering into a happening of free time, which is happening through all kinds of technologies and architectures, and of course including also the teacher, and I will come back to that. So, but I want really remind you that the first meaning of the Greek skole, and we all speak Greek, so all the Spanish, escuela, scola, ecole, all come from the Greek. We speak Greek, yes, and Greek means not learning, yes. The first meaning is not learning. The first meaning is a certain kind of time, free time, yes. It is time as the time which is separated from the time of production, yes, which is, in a broad sense, the economic time, the time of the oikos, yes, of the oikonomy, but it is also not the time of the social, not the time of the market, not the time of society. It is free time. It is time that is separated. And in Hannah Arendt's phrase, she translates skole as it is time in which we are free for the world. That's how she formulates it. So it is a time for study and exercise, as the time for the new generation to find, so not to choose, to find its own destination, which is not the one defined, projected, or dreamt by the older generation. And this, I think, you could call a kind of freedom, which is not a political, but a pedagogical freedom, not a political or not a juridical freedom. And to become, so it is to find one's own destination, but also to become fit to take care of the common world. School is not just there for the student, school is there maybe even in the first place for the world, to take care of world, not at first of the student. So that is why it is not just socialization or initiation, because it allows the possibility to find own destination, but education, and why it implies the possibility of renewal. So hence, education is never about policing. That means about maintaining or installing an order, or reinstalling an order. And it is not about curing or healing. It is no therapy and no medicine. Yes. School as pedagogic form is neither oriented towards or tamed by a political utopia, nor by a normative ideal of a person, but it is in itself, I think, the materialization. So the materialization, and I will come back to that, it is a concrete architecture, concrete technologies. Yes? It is a materialization of a utopian belief. Yes? And I think the next slide, no, this one, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, I will have to go back. Sorry. So it is by a utopian belief, and the utopian belief is, you can formulate it as follows: everybody can learn everything. Yes. So stated differently, it means neither what you can learn nor what you have to learn are naturally predefined. So not, oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So not predefined, there is no predefined connection between a body, abilities, and social positions. We don't know what a body and a mind is able of. We don't know what it is able of. That's the starting point of the school. Yes? That's a utopian starting point. That's not the utopia at the end that we have to realize, but that's the utopia from which we start. So that means that school from its very beginning was an attack. Yes? It was an attack on the idea, just as democracy was an attack on aristocracy. It was an attack on the idea that only aristocracy has free time, because the others have, of course, to work. And on the very forceful fable that Plato tells in his reflections about the just state, the republic, the ideal state. So, and this is a story that Plato tells. Plato offers. He says, the story goes that once upon a time, modern nature invented all human beings and mixed different metals, gold, silver, bronze, or iron, into their characters. While all of you in the city are brothers, we will say in our tale, yet God is fashioning those of you who are fitted to hold rule, mingled gold in their generation, for which reason they are the most precious. But in the helpers, silver and iron, and brass in the farmers and other craftsmen. Yeah. So Plato is saying this, formulating this fable with a question is, so how to organize, how to come to the ideal state? And Plato says, we have to lie. Yes. We have to lie. We have to tell a fable. And Plato explicitly says that he's lying. Yes. But this is what we have to say. That from nature, mother nature, and nature comes from the Latin nasci, which is to be born, yeah? By birth. There are some that are mixed with gold, some with silver, some with iron, other with bronze. From birth, yes? And hence, you are able to something, you have a talent, we would say today, you are able to do something, and this ability then is also related to a social position in society. This is by mother nature, yes? This is predefined. Well, the school is precisely an attack, a direct attack at this fable. It is saying there is no predefined connection between a body, an ability, and a social position. Not predefined. Yes. So that's, I think, a very strong idea. And it is related to what you could call maybe, or I would like to call, the most typical pedagogical phrase. And the most typical pedagogical phrase is a very simple one, but I think it is expressing this belief. Yes? That is, that you say to those students that come and say, this is nothing for me. Yes? This I cannot. Yes? This is not for our kind of people. And they are confirmed by sociology that is saying, these kind of people, they are so and so and so, and so they will not become so and so and so. Or they are confirmed by psychology and by neurology that is saying their brain is so and so and so, or their psychology is so and so and so, and hence they will not be. Yeah. And I think the pedagogical belief is saying that can all be true. Yes? And it can be that you say, I cannot. But then comes the pedagogical phrase which is saying, just have a try. It's a very simple sentence, but it is expressing precisely this idea. We don't know what the body is able to. We don't know what a mind is able to. And if you don't believe it, look at YouTube. Look at all the videos on YouTube where people do incredible things with their bodies. Incredible things with their bodies. Yes? So we don't know. We don't know. That's the starting point. Yeah? We will see. That's the start. Just try. Just try. Yeah. So that, I think, is a very important thing. And then, as I said also, the attack on the idea that only aristocracy has free time. So school is saying everybody has free time, should have free time to study and exercise. Yeah. However, so a condition of free time is not a place of emptiness, but it is a condition, so it's not just leisure, it's study and exercise, but a condition in which things, words, practices are disconnected. So you see, everybody can learn everything. So it is where things, words, practices are disconnected from their regular use in the family, in society, and hence it refers to condition in which something of the world becomes, in a certain sense, open for common use. So free means then has at once a negative and a positive meaning. So freed from productive time and from productive space. That means from the logic of economic or social gain or return, which is suspended. But freed also to study and exercise in order to give shape to oneself, to get in a good shape. That you could call is the sense of what we could call formation. And I want to summarize, and it will repeat some of the things that I said, the operations of the school as a pedagogic form as follows. The first operation is that this particular gathering and arrangement suspends. And the notion of suspension is very interesting. You can read it in the Oxford Dictionary, very clear. It says it is to put temporarily out of effect. Yes. So it means not to destroy something. Yes. It's not to negate or neglect something. It is to suspend temporarily, to put temporarily out of effect. So it is an arrangement that suspends the ties of the family and the ties of the state. Entering a school, everyone becomes a student or a pupil like anyone else. That means one is no longer daughter or son. No daughter or son in the, let's say, the usual sense, but also not the daughter or son of the state. No family. It is a visible mark, I would say, of our acknowledgement, which is another point of belief of the school, that our children are not our children. I use the phrase of Kyle Gibran. Yeah. So it is important to emphasize, and maybe I related to this becoming a pupil. I think it's really interesting to see this comes from the Latin pupillus, yes, and the first meaning of the Latin pupillus is orphan. Yes, you have no family. So, at school, you have no family. You are You are a student like anyone else. Yes. So, and it is important, I think, to emphasize that school is a plural and embodied performativity, yes, addressing everyone as just one, singular, everyone a pupil, which is not about recognizing each person as having her own properties or property, her own or proper talents, her own or proper needs or wants. No, it is precisely about refusing any natural or predefined, as I said, connection between bodies and their so-called proper characteristics or so-called proper needs. So, or the capacities or needs ascribed or attributed to them from outside. It offers precisely the experience of being without destination, but being able to find, and I repeat, not to choose, to find one's own destination. That is what it means to become a pupil, you could say. It also, and that's the second thing, I think it also suspends the functional order and use of things, words, actions, making knowledge practices public. And I love to use the image. I think it's a very strong image to talk about the school. It's about putting knowledge, practices on the table, putting them on the table, get them out of the circle of production and consumption, put them at the table. That means at arm length, yes. So you can touch them, you can get them, and it is done in a particular way, and that is something that I have to go back a little bit again. Yeah. It is done in what I call a grammatized or scripted form, which is turning something of the world into school matter. Yes? So I want to point here to the fact that this is a very artificial thing. Yes? You will never find, yes, these birds that are mentioned, that you can see here together, yes, that you can see here together, you will never find them together in nature. Yes? But they are brought together in a certain way in order to make you able to relate to the world of the birds. Yes? That means not to just to be in the world, but also to relate to it, yes? To study it, yes? To deal with it. Yes? So that, I think, is an important... so that's turning something... so it's not just the child that becomes a school child, pupil. It's also matter that becomes school matter. It's also changed. It's taking out of its context, it becomes school matter. It becomes something different. It is, and that's an artificial thing to do. And the third operation, and which is also related to this, the third operation is the one in which you make attentive or form attention, which is, so it's making attentive or forming attention, which is relying, as Anna Arendt says, on a double kind of love. So the pedagogical love is not a parental love, not a parental love. It is the love at first for the world, or for something out of the world, for mathematics, language, nature. It's a love for the world, and it is a love for the new generation. It's a double love. So, and this forming attention is related to this double love and to all kinds of disciplining practices to make attention possible. And this notion of attention, I think, is a very, very interesting notion, a very important notion. Attention is really different from intention. Yes? Attention has many connotations, but one of the connotations is to be present, and I will come back to this notion of present. It is to be present, but it's also to be near, to attend something, to be there, to be near to something. I will come back to that issue. So this importance of attention, you can also formulate it differently. The school does not only make things known, but also exposes students to these things and gives these things authority, yes, or presence, if you want. It makes them come into our company in the strong sense. They become our company in a strong sense. At school, and if it works as a school in the sense of pedagogic form, students are exposed to the world, or someone is turned into a student in relation to this world disclosure. So think about mathematics or biology or the world of numbers or the world of nature or the world of the birds. School is not just about transmitting knowledge about those worlds, but it's offering the new generation the possibility to relate, which means two things. It means to become attached to something, but it means also to attach, to be concerned about something, but it means also that it is possible to relate. It means also that there is a kind of distance which is possible. So what precisely happens at school, when it works as a school, is that something becomes real and comes to exist in and of itself. Birds become real birds. Wood becomes real wood. Danish words become real Danish words. This means literally that something, Danish words, a piece of woodwork, birds, are becoming part of our world and informs and forms that world. But when something becomes part of our world in this sense, it does not mean that it becomes an object of knowledge, something that we now know about that it is part of the world, but rather it becomes part of the world in which we are immediately involved, entangled, and something that becomes interesting, yes? That starts to interest us. So it is what the girl was saying about changing the world. The world is changing. Yes? Not changing because we know more, but because our relationship to the world is changing. It becomes, in the strong sense, part of our world. We could say that it is no longer an inanimate object, but a living thing. Yes? And I'm sorry if it is maybe too banal to say, but in fact, the school is making everything and every creature speak. It's about speaking animals, it's about speaking shares, it's about changing things into objects, changing objects into things. Yes? And Heidegger said the thing, the notion of the thing, is that it is something that concerns us. It's not just an object. A thing is something different. So someone who becomes interested in mathematics is becoming attached to the world of numbers, starts to belong to that world. For him or her, the world of math becomes a matter of concern. And this is literally, and I would have liked to have shown you, to be able to show you something of the movie. This afternoon we are going to talk a little bit about that. The movie The Sun by the brothers Dardenne, Belgian brothers Dardenne. And so we are confronted here with a teacher at work who is called Olivier. It is a very ordinary teacher. So it's not the spectacle of Dead Poets Society. Huh? It's a which is a very wrong thing. Huh? Very wrong. Dead Poets Society. So it's a very ordinary teacher who succeeds, however, and through particular things he's doing and the arrangement in which he's working, in sparking an interest for woodworking in one of his utterly beaten and troubled students. In fact, it's a youth offender which was convicted of murder and who comes to learn an occupation. He has to deal with wood. You have to learn a job in the hopes of someday being able to return to society, to reintegrate. So you see a lot of intentions. A lot of intentions. He has to go there in order to learn something that can help him to reintegrate in society. So, but what we see in the movie, and so I would really advise you to have a look at it, is how wood becomes real wood for the student, and not simply something with which to make cabinets or chairs or to use for fuel in the fireplace, or something that leads him to an occupation that will integrate him again in society. As said, the wood here becomes detached from its proper place. That means the place that it has in all kinds of intentions. So it becomes detached from that proper place. It becomes wood in itself. It is something that he attends and then becomes, in a strong sense, part of the world of this student. Again, the world is changing. It begins to belong to his world, to what interests him and occupies him. It is something that begins to form him, brings about changes in him, changes the way his life and the world really appear to him. So it allows him, and that's I think interesting, it allows him to begin anew with the world. He can start anew with the world, and now wood not only has a place in this world, which is also a notion of belonging, but he starts to belong to the world of wood. So it's not the direction, in fact, changes, and I come back to that. So it is important to emphasize that school allows, I think, for an experience of existence as being able to begin with something. Something starts to matter. Something starts to require care. It is, moreover, an experience at school which is shared. It is a collective of people which experiences what it means to have something in common which is put on the table. Of course, there are differences between, there's a lot of diversity between people, but these come suspended, and again, suspension is not destroy, not forget, but it's temporarily put out of effect. This diversity is suspended when school happens. So school is something that happens, it's a happening. It's a gathering that turns in a happening, that turns in a kind of event, but something becomes interesting when it is attended and attention is created. And I would like to refer to a remark by a Belgian psychiatrist in a newspaper who was commenting on a gang of girls, exclusively girls, who were terrorizing people who are entering and leaving the railway station in Bruges with a lot of violence. And he says, so look at those girls, he says, they are banned from school, or they disdain or neglected themselves. But anyway, friendships exist here only by recognizing the misery of others. Yes. These relationships don't start from a shared interest, but from a shared lack. Yes. So I want to point to that because I find it very interesting that he's pointing to the fact that the gathering at the school, the coming together, is not based on need. I think it's not based on need. Yes. It's based on, in a positive sense, on an interest. It is something that is always about to become. It's not something that you have because you share needs that you already have. But it is a community of interest that becomes, that starts to become. So, so far as the scholastic is concerned with opening up the world, so with attention, I think, with opening up the world, I think attention and so not so much motivation is the crucial issue. The school, as a pedagogic form, and if it operates as such, instills the new generation with an attentiveness toward the world. So things start to speak. And you could call that a kind of, it's a strange term to use, but you could call, and I will explain it a bit, about the magical moment, when something outside of ourselves makes us or invites us to pay regard and to regard. Yes? And that's also a very interesting notion in English, to regard, which means, of course, it means to look, yes, but it means also to consider. It means also to be respectful, to be concerned, to be thoughtful. So something invites us to regard it. Yes. In that magic moment, something suddenly stops being a tool or a resource and becomes, as I said, a real thing. A thing that makes us also think and also makes us study and practice. So it is an event, in the strong sense of the word, a matter that starts to matter. It is a mathematical proof, a novel, a virus, a chromosome, a block of wood or an engine, all of these things can be made meaningful and interesting. And I think that that is the magical, if you want, event of the school, which is not to be traced back to an individual decision, choice, or motivation. While motivation is a kind of personal, mental affair, interest is always something outside of ourselves, something that touches us and moves us to study, to think, and to practice. It takes us outside of ourselves. So the school becomes a time-space of interesse, of that which is shared between us, the world in itself. At that moment, students are not individuals with specific needs who choose where they want to invest their time and energy. They are exposed to the world and invited to take an interest in it. Without the presence of a world, there is no interest and no attention. And this notion of presence, again, is a very interesting notion. It comes from the Latin, again. So it's the presence, so it is pre-esse. Yes? It is, of course, also the word for now. Yes? In French, it is maintenant, which is very interesting. It is taking. It is the moment something becomes in the reach of your hand. Yes, maintenant. Yes. So it is the present is not just. It's not a point. Yeah? Present is not a point in time. The present is where you have a kind of gap in time. Yes, kind of gap in time. It is something that is for you. It is present. And it is present in the sense that it is a present, it is given, and it is present in the sense that it is a kind of presentation, or it is presented to you. Yes? It is given to you. So it is before you. You are not in it. Yes? There is a kind of distance there. I will come back a little bit to that also. The art of, if I have, I'm sorry. The art of school making, but I started a little bit later, I think, so I can have a little bit more time. So the art of school making is in a way, hence, the art of magic, if you want, which is the art, again, which implies all kinds of techniques and artifacts of making something starting to speak. It is to arrange a mode of gathering or togetherness, the achievement of which is that it is no longer I, as a subject, as meant to belong to nobody but myself, who thinks and feels. And this is not because one would be overwhelmed, but because precisely the gathering makes present. That's what named magic, to make something present. Something which transforms the relationship and makes we get attached, that we start to feel obliged. And this, I think, is what we could call the scholastic understanding of belonging. Yes? It realizes a belonging. We get attached, but this presence is not telling us what to do, but it becomes a cause to which we become attached and which requires to look for the right measures, the right ways to deal with it, which means also to live with it, the right way to live with it. So hence it is not the student who is at the center, it is not student-centered, and it asks, and it's not the student who is at the center and asks what she can do with it or what it means for her, but it is just the way around. Obligations are derived from attachments, and attachments are a cause to feel and think, to be able and to become able. The cause obliges, but it is so the how is not predefined, but what we are challenged to look for when we are in its presence, that means attentive. That's, we are there. That means that something gets authority. So for me, the pedagogical authority is not so much the authority of the teacher, but it's the authority of the thing. Something gets authority. It starts to say me something, to address me in some sense. So this means, I think, and that for me is a very important thing, that the direction changes. If we talk about this sense of belonging, we usually have one sense, one direction in our minds. I think the direction changes. So it is not the student, not her needs, not her projects that offer the starting point, But it is language, mathematics, it is woodwork, that is what is the starting point. And that is what is offering the measure, or asks you to find the measure. You are not the measure. It is to find the measure, to do things right. It is an obligation to do it right. And that is something totally different from saying that you have to do it effective and efficiently. Yes? Which is not excluding. So the one is not excluding the other, but I think it's something different. So school is the name for a milieu, again, formed by practices and architectures. And I think that the architectures are not just a building, it's very particular technologies, very particular ways of bringing, like this one, is a very particular way to bring bodies together, which I think is not scholastic, or at least to a lesser extent scholastic, because it has something, the architecture and the way you are sitting is doing something with your attention, which in school we try to prevent, if school wants to work as a pedagogic form. So the way you sit is not, I think, like in the school. So it is a milieu formed by practices and architectures, by technologies, by tools, I come back to one of them, the blackboard and so on, that contain no techniques of production. It are not technology to produce something, you could say, but techniques of fostering and challenging. Fostering as empowering something to speak. So it is about to give the power to something to make that it can address us, that it can speak to us, to make us attentive in that sense. And the teacher is in some way, you could say, a spokesperson for the world, or embodies it. And her voice, and I come back to that, is a crucial technology. Okay, challenging as obligating. So it is fostering, but also challenging as obligating. And as such, it is articulating and materializing the stance that we, humans, are not alone in the world. There exist also, in the strong sense, viruses, ghosts, ideas, animals, and we have to find ways to live with them. Yes, they are, or they can become real. Yes, so we are not alone in the world. So school is not about choices and needs, not about development, motivation, or intention, but about attention and encounter, what I called company. It is about get company. So school translates the message, welcome here in our world, which is offered to you to study and exercise, free time, in order to find your way, which also means to try, to err, to be able, to become able to find your way. So that means not only to function in society, but also to be able to take a distance from society. Yes. But also, so to find your way, but also, I think, in order to become fit to take care of the world and renew the world, since school is not just about you, but about the world to which we belong. I don't know, can you tell me how, 10 minutes, I have to make a choice, I think. I would have liked, but I will leave it out because 15. That will not work. 15. Oh. If it is not too boring, okay. So, okay, because I wanted to say something, I have these images, oh no, here. You see here, this is the images of what I called getting out, getting out of the things out of the world and putting them on the table, yes? Getting them out their usual context and putting them out, so make them public, yes? So you see the motor who is no longer in the car, but is on a table, but he is not on the table of the garage, but the table of the school, which means that the student can exercise with it without the threat of losing money. It's a different table than the table in the garage. You have the blocks, the letters. If you want to learn to read, that's a very artificial thing. Very artificial thing. Yes? You find no letters in nature. Yes? Letter is a technology that has been developed, invented, again, in the same period as the democracy and the school. In the same period, the alphabetic writing is an invention. Yes? It is an artificial way to deal with language, to be able to study language. Yes? Not to just use the language, to learn to use it, because therefore we don't have to go to school, of course. We all learn that just by doing. But in order to be able to relate to it, to study what we say. Yeah? And you have the naked drawing. It's a very clear image. So there you see, you have the body, which is usually clothed. And usually the clothes reveal something about the social position, as you know. So now, yeah, okay. So usually the clothes reveal something of the social position, so you can order the body, but here the body is naked. Yes, it is just naked, out of function. It's not functioning. Yes, it has no function. It's just beautiful, and you have to train your eyes and your hand. You don't know yet what you will be able to, or what you are going to see. Yeah? You are just trying, just doing that kind of thing. Yeah, and this is, so this was from the sun. This is the image of the son of the man. So this is this boy which has murdered someone. Okay, just images. So, but I wanted to add something, but I go very briefly because I want to say something about what you addressed at the end of your introduction. So that to make, so I think this making present is very crucial. This making present is a technological thing. So it makes something before you. If you write it, if you make an inscription, it's not just there. Now it becomes there. It's present. It's before you. That's it. That's an inscription, a materialization that makes it possible just not to speak, but to think about your speaking. Yes? So that's very important, an artificial thing that you do. But of course, present is also that it starts to speak. And I think that certainly today, we should really give a lot of attention to the voice of the teacher. I think that the voice of the teacher, yes, and tone of the teacher, and the language that he is using, or she is using, is very important to make the world speak. Yes, to make the animals speak, to make the landscape speak, to make the ghosts speak, yes, to make them say something. I will not do that, so I wanted to say something about that, but I will not do that. Maybe one more thing I want to say is the incredible invention of the blackboard. Incredible invention of the blackboard, which is nothing else than a vertical table. It's a table. You put the blackboard like that. It's a table. So you put something on the table. Put something on the table. You keep everything out. You just point to something. You point to something. And then we can try to focus our attention to that something. Yes, it helps to focus attention. But also, not unimportant, you can also wipe it away. Yes, and start again. That is something, that's what I want to come to. That, for example, is something that is impossible with the screens and with the computer. You cannot. Of course, you can think you want to wipe it away, but you cannot. You cannot. Everything that you do on that thing counts. The program behind it counts it, because it will improve its program by counting what you do on that thing. You cannot make, in that sense, a real error. Everything will be made productive. Everything will get into the program. So that brings me to the last, and there I want to say something about that. The last point is, so school, I think, was the message, translates the message, welcome here in our world. I think today, many educational institutions, and there I'm really not sure about what I'm saying about the free schools or whatever, so I really cannot. I'm referring to my experience of schools and what they are often asked to become. So the school seems to be that they translate another message. So this is the message of the Time magazine in 2006. You as the person of the year, you are the person of the year, sorry. You control the information age. Welcome to your world. And I think that indeed, that is what our educational institutions are increasingly doing. They are transformed from schools into learning environments, including personalized learning paths, student centers, competence or performance orientation, also inclusion, talent, need diagnosis, motivation strategies, emphasis on choices, which I think not only translate and transmit this message ever stronger, but also put it into effect. Yes, they put it into effect through all kinds of technologies, which are not technologies of formation, so not school technologies, but which are technologies of personalization, technologies of profiling and profilation. Yes, and we are, as you know, constantly occupied by our profiles. Yes, we are constantly working, managing, monitoring our profiles on many places, in many places. Yes. Working on our profiles, which also means that, in a way, and as you know, I just take the obvious example of Amazon, which makes that this kind of learning environment is not about getting to know something outside of your world, but in fact about encountering more and more yourself, because that is what the program is doing. Yes? It is not disconnecting your body from an ability and from a position, but it is extremely connecting it. Yes, it is extremely connecting it. It is trying to find out what your abilities would be or your need could be, and then give you exactly a kind of offer that would meet your need. So it is fixing that. It's doing the opposite. Yeah, I will stop. It's doing just the opposite. So I think that I have to think how I'm going to close it because. So I think that so what is happening to the school today is that it is turned into a learning environment, which means that one thing is learning is now defined, and I just quote the documents of the European Commission. Documents is saying we are going for a shift in thinking about learning. We are going to think about learning starting from the learning outcomes. Yes. So it means that now we transform learning into a production process. It is producing learning outcomes, and we are going to define them on beforehand to see whether we can efficiently and effectively produce the learning outcomes. Yes. So that means that the fundamental thing about school, that it separates the time of production from the free time, where you are not submitted to the requirements of production, is gone. It's just put the same. Learning is just like working, just like producing. It's producing outcomes. And as a production process, you have to ask the question of efficiency and effectivity. That's a production process. If you think that it is not about the production process, but that it is about the production of, about a caring process, then the question is not about effectivity and efficiency, but about justice, yes? About doing things right, about doing justice to the things. It's a very different kind of question. And if I may, I'm not sure if I will be able to do it in such a short time, but I wanted to come back to your beginning with the tattoo and the performance. So the performance I already said, so the performance in a certain sense has to do with the fact that we transform learning in a production process. So you have to perform, and many things become perform, which is, by the way, also the reason why we have the feeling that we have no time. Because all time becomes production time. So even our health is something that we have to produce. So even the quality time with our children is something we have to produce. So efficiently and effectively. So we have the feeling we have no time. But the other thing is related for me to the tattoo. And it is related to the digital. And when I say the digital, you have to think about at least three things. The digital, so one is the screen. Never has there been invented something that can attract our attention so forcefully as the screen. It is incredible. You all know, you probably have to fight not to do that. Yes? So that's not a personal mistake. Yeah? It's not a personal issue. It's the attraction. It's a force. It's a real strong force. But it's a force. So, and that I said, school is about attention. So this is a force we should use. Yes. But I think the way it is used now, mainly, is not for formation. It's not about taking care, but it's mainly about capitalization. Yes? It is mainly about getting your attention in order to sell you something, to make you do something. But I think we should think about the use of the screen and the force of the screen. So that is one thing of the digital. The other of the digital is the profanation. So I put something on the table, means I take it out of context to some extent and put it on the table. So I free it from some context. I make it public. You can reappropriate it in different ways. Yes? That is what the internet is doing in a massive way. So in a certain sense, you could say this is a very scholastic operation. It makes public, you can find videos about everything on YouTube. So if you want to learn to speak at a conference, you can have a video to learn to speak at a conference. If you can find everything. So that is profanation. That is taken out of context. It is without history, without tradition, without anything. So it's there on the table. You can take it. Yes. So, but also there, I think what the issue is that it has become a kind of idle turning of being able. That is why I was referring to these movies on YouTube. Yes? What they can do with their bodies. Yes? Somebody can put their feet, I don't know where, behind. Yes? So that's being able. That's just being able. But in that kind of exercises, which shows that the pedagogical belief that we don't know what we are able for is there, but what it misses is that the world has become a decor. Yes? The world is just there to be at the back of the film that we make about what we are able to do. So it is not about taking care of the world. It is not about speaking, because the image is just passing by and leaves no trace. And here I come with the tattoo. So it leaves no trace. The world comes just by. So we have a feeling of irreality. And in order to meet the feeling of irreality, what we do are many things. Many young people cut. Yes? We have to feel that we are real. Yes? Others use tattoos to make it real, to leave a trace of what is passing by, so that it can form us, in this case, our body. And others, like many of you, I suppose, we go to run a marathon, 2 marathons, 3 marathons, 4 marathons, because we have to exhaust our body in order to feel that we are alive. Because it seems that everything becomes irreal in some sense. It is not offering us any obligations anymore. So that is why I would say, and that's the last thing I say, that is why I think that we have to reinvent school. That is, we have to make time, that is what school is doing, giving time, and let the world speak. Yes? Let the world speak, so that we start to care about it. Yeah? That we are belonging to it. Not the world belongs to us, but we belong to the world. Okay, I stop that. Sorry if it is too late.